Hello and welcome back to the And Both podcast. My guest today is Jade Adgate. Jade is the death doula behind Farewell Fellowship, an in-person death doula practice serving families across Middle Tennessee, a death doula education program called Farewell Education, and the Farewell Library, which is an online resource hub built around the idea of building fluency around death one book at a time. She is a mom of three, two teenage daughters, and an 11-year-old son, and says that the lessons she needs most for her death care practice almost always come from her parenthood practice first, which when you hear her talk about it, the two together makes complete sense. In this conversation, we talk about what it actually looks like when someone is dying, not the movie version, but the real one. We talk about the control we hold on to at the end of life and what that costs. And I want to also put this out there for everyone that there are a few examples used in this episode of real people that Jade has worked with in her practice as a doula. And one of the people includes a little girl who died shortly before her 5th birthday. All the families have given Jade permission to share stories. And so they're all coming at it from a place of wanting to share lessons and share experiences and things like that. But I wanted to point it out because, especially in the case of children, death is a really hard topic to talk about. So if this isn't something for you, please feel free to skip this episode and join us for the next one. Or you can go back and listen to a previous one that you may have missed. We're talking about what we're actually buying when we extend life with treatment, depending from a variety of illnesses, and whether we're using that time the way we'd want to. So there are no monsters around corners if you know where all the corners are. Here's Jade. Welcome to And Both, a podcast about what it really looks like to put yourself on the list while raising kids and doing all the other things life asks of you. I'm your host, Ashley Blackington, and on this show, you'll hear conversations with moms who are figuring it out in their own ways, plus a few solo episodes from me from time to time. It's not about having all the answers, it's about sharing stories, learning from each other, and knowing we don't have to choose between either or when we're living in the middle of And Both. Let's get into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to the And Both podcast. My guest today is Jade Adgate. How are you?
I'm doing really well, Ashley. How are you?
I'm excited. We were just talking about this a little bit before we started, is that I've had sort of a run of recordings. They won't all get released like one after another, but I've had a run of recordings where we're talking more about end of life. And I think it was maybe last spring, it was sort of all recordings that were centered around getting into parenthood and all of that stuff. So it's kind of interesting how things have shifted as we go. But
how you're going from one end of the spectrum to the other.
Exactly. Yeah.
So is there a reason? Is there what's
I don't
what's
know.
going on?
I don't know what's happening. But it's very cool. It's sort of like I feel like I hit like a pocket of people who really are in this space professionally, personally, and it just sort of like one leads to another. But what I found especially in the end of life conversations is that everyone's talking about it, but nobody's talking about it, and everyone's kind of acknowledging, but there's not really a whole lot of space. So I'm always thrilled to have somebody come on and chat with about.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I think you're absolutely right. It's lonely when you're walking this part of the journey, and yet everybody dies. So we're all walking into this space at some point. Yeah. So I love to talk about it and just try to normalize the experience. I think that's a huge part of the work that I do.
Yeah. That's the phrase. Nobody gets out of life alive. That's like
that's right.
Horrendous, but also true. And it's just a really hard thing. So before we get into all of that, how about if you let people know a little bit about you and what you want them to know?
Yeah, my name's Jade Adgate, and I am the death doula behind Farewell Fellowship. So that is in-person death doula services for people across Middle Tennessee. I also teach other doulas who are called to companion those who are approaching end of life through Farewell Education. And then I run the Farewell Library, which is an online death and grief resource hub where we really try to build fluency around death one book at a time. So altogether, the work is really the practice of saying farewell. And alongside all that, I am a mom of three. I have two teenage daughters and an 11-year-old son. So I am definitely standing firmly in And Both territory with death in one hand and then parenting and shepherding in these young little lives in the other.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, I feel like parenthood is this constant transition, right? It's like, I used to always say, like, yesterday was the easiest day because it's already happened. Like, you have no idea
Mm.
what's happening today. And then you move into the teenage years, and I feel like the foot is on the little gas pedal for how quickly things start to move and change, because your kids aren't just getting bigger and they're not just acquiring more gross motor coordination or all those things. It's like the emotional, the intellectual, the relationships, all of that. And I feel like that's what makes it feel like you just all of a sudden someone has like a brick on the floor and you're like, what just happened? I was just like, I was
just
here.
grounded and now I am not.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's teenagers, it's such an intense experience. And always through my work in death care, the lessons that I need to learn for my death care practice come from my parenthood practice. And the lesson that I am getting loud and clear over and over right now is, how do you shepherd and hold while also trusting that it's time to let go and that I don't have to control it? And it is such a hard practice. I have, like, to your point, I have fantasies about when they were toddlers. Like, even though in toddler years, right, I just could not wait to get out of it. Just the amount of control that I had. All I had to do was keep them fed and safe and clean. And I knew what to do. And even if it was exhausting, I could, at the end of the day, feel like I had done it right. I feel like on the other side of that, with these, my oldest just started driving. So at 16, how do I trust that she's going to get in that car and drive away, and she's going to make all the right decisions, and she's going to be safe, and the world's going to be kind to her, right? It's just a real practice in trust and releasing control.
It's such a wild time. Like, so my oldest just turned 13, and it's the same thing. Like, she's not driving yet. I am not sure how I'm ever going to be ready for that. Not that she'll be a bad driver or whatever, but just this idea of like, someday she will walk out the door and she will get in a vehicle that like is hers to direct wherever it goes. And
her sibling might want to go along with her. That's been, because my daughters are 16 and 14. And so sometimes the 14-year-old wants to go to Target too. And I watch my 16-year-old drive off with my 14-year-old. And I'm just standing here like, this is trustworthy. This is safe.
Yeah.
And I've spent hundreds of hours in the car with her, helping her get here. And I know she is trustworthy. And also, it's a big, scary world. And they are the most precious things to me. And it's just really trusting that they can navigate this, that all the work that we've done to get here, that has gotten us here. It's easy to say right now, but if they came home and got in that car, you'd see me like tense up.
Like, I'm fine. When will you
track
be back?
them on Life 360? She's going 25.
Yeah. Our middle school here, so my oldest is in 7th grade, and the middle school here, I think, does a really good job of, yes, helping kids. But I think part of the responsibility that's not necessarily so spoken about is they're helping parents. Like, in our elementary schools, like, parents can go in and out of the school and they have them come in and volunteer and yada, yada. You go into middle school, you can go in and see the middle school in the summer and all of that stuff. But kids go into the middle school and they're there.
Yeah.
And it's their responsibility to get to all their classes. It's their responsibility to do all the things they need to do between 8:30 and 3:15 every day.
Yeah.
And the principal gives a big speech when they're coming in. It's like, they're going to mess up. They're going to forget stuff. They're going to like make choices that they aren't happy with and all of those things. And they happen in this wall. And if we weren't prepared for that to happen, we should not be doing the job that we're doing. Like, we understand that your kids are like human jellyfish right now. Like, they don't have a form. They don't have a shape. They're trying to figure out all of these things, and everything's changing physically, mentally, emotionally, all of this stuff.
So your principle helps you guys let go of control. Yeah. And kind of easing you into it. And there's such a beautiful parallel there for end of life, because I think a lot of the time when we talk about death, we're talking about the experience of the dying person. But really, most of my work centers on supporting the caregivers at end of life. And it's a very similar thing where the work that we're doing is in letting go of control, especially if that's been a common dynamic in the relationship. So like if you have a couple and maybe the wife controlled a lot for the husband, then as he's dying, the wife is still trying to control his experience, to make it the best experience it can be, to help him have those meaningful last conversations with his children, or helping him, whatever it is, right? Accept death, or trying to beautify and bring sacredness into this. But ultimately, it's someone else's experience and they
Mm-hmm.
have to do it themselves. So there's like this, I feel like the doula is kind of like your principal. Like, how do we help people make holy what they can and release control for the rest? It's like this delicate balance.
Mm-hmm. And then on the flip side of like, if the person who is the one that always has been in control and always has been the go-to is the person who's dying, what's the experience for the person who has always benefited, for lack of a better term, but has always benefited from that person providing the structure?
That can be so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been, I had a client, her name was Roxanne, and she gave me emphatic permission to share as much as I wanted about her story. And that was exactly the experience. Roxanne was a being of a different universe. She was just bold and brave and bright. And she was absolutely in control of everything. And she made the world better with that. And when she was dying, she wanted to control from the grave. Like, she wrote me these long lists of things that I was supposed to do after she was dead to
Mm-hmm.
control the dying space for her. And it was such a practice in trying to hone in on where meaning really was and on what we needed to trust and what we needed to let go of. And I learned so much from Roxanne. We're still learning from Roxanne. Actually, I was with her husband on Sunday. It's been a year since she died now. And we found videos of her that she recorded
Oh
telling
my
us
God.
about what she wanted us to, how she wanted to be remembered, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
she controlled every single part of it. And so much of that was a gift, truly, a
Mm-hmm.
thoughtfulness and an intentionality that we don't often see in these spaces. And also, it was her struggle in life to let go and trust. And that carried through in death, because often how we live is how we die. Who we are is who we are when we're dying. Even
Yeah.
though that's hard for us to see, I think that time and time again seems to be the truth of it.
That was my grandmother was somebody like that. My grandmother planned her funeral when I was in third grade. Planned, paid for, like, everything. She went in one day, was very matter of fact about it, and was like, listen, everyone's going to be sad. And I don't want anyone to make decisions because I ultimately want things the way that I want them. And she did not die for another, how old was I? I was in grad school, like almost 20 years. So she was like also economic, because the cost of funeral expenses would have definitely risen over those 15 years or whatever. But the weird thing is that one of the things that she has 6 kids, and she wanted 6 yellow roses at her, on the table and stuff like that. She was cremated, and her kids said, they went in, and after she had passed, they went in and they said, okay, here, here, and here. And actually, we don't want yellow roses. We want red roses. For whatever reason, they decided that's what they wanted. I'm not kidding. The whole family showed up on the day of the service, and there were 6 yellow roses in the vase on the table. It was like, there are no edits to be made. And everyone was like, do, 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 do.
Oh, I believe it. I
Mm-hmm.
believe it. I've absolutely, especially in those kind of liminal days, the first few weeks after someone's died, I've had so many experiences where you feel like their energy is still present.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they play pranks, sometimes they make visits, sometimes they get their way, right? Sometimes they bring
Mm-hmm.
comfort. But yeah, I absolutely feel that. I love when
Yeah.
somebody can have that matter of fact approach with their planning. It's something that we really need. It can be really daunting to try and figure out what your loved one would have wanted in those
Yeah.
really tender moments. So what a beautiful gift she gave you guys.
Yeah. I also wonder about specifically for that generation, like people born in the 20s and 30s, because death was something that was not so experienced. It wasn't so hospitalized. It wasn't so, they didn't have the technology to put things off, right? Long-term chronic illness, severe injury, stuff like that did not have the survival rate that it has now. Cancer did not have the survival rate and things like that. So I just feel like, and her husband grew up on a farm. And so if you are on a farm, there's like animals are born and animals die and all of these things. But there was just such this, it wasn't an over there thing. It was very much in the front and center, like born, growing, doing, being, dying. Whereas now we have, there's so many pills and there's so much medication and there's so much in surgery and all of these things that like, have we gotten to a place where we can skirt around it for as long as possible so then it becomes a thing that's not addressed. So then when we do finally have to address it, it is like Mount Olympus for people.
Oh, I think you're so right about that. I think what you're saying is how you're pointing out that death has become less ordinary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a real tragedy for us. We have less elders who show us what it looks like to approach end of life. I mean, we live in such a youth-driven culture, right? All we want to talk about is how we can stay young and beautiful forever. So then where are the elders that show us what aging looks like, what decline looks like, how to gracefully move toward the end, how to prepare for the end, how to lead into the end with intention? I think we're really lacking that. There's a writer that he's very controversial in death doula world. His name is Stephen Jenkinson, and he was a palliative care chaplain in Canada for his career. And he writes about the idea that with all of our pills and our procedures and our ways to extend life, that what we've really done is we've learned how to extend dying. And I think that's such an interesting idea because no one ever feels in my work, no one ever feels like they're dying until we're in that very last phase of it. People keep expecting, I think, for there to be this big moment of transformation and they are going to know internally, now I'm dying. But it's much more like a gradual creep. And whatever you've been living with just continues to increase. And the struggle becomes bigger than the ease.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really it. And people seem to be a little caught off guard by it. And so I kind of wonder if like what we're talking about with all of these life extensions, and I'm so grateful for them. If I get breast cancer, I will treat it, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying I don't want it. And also has what we've created become something that just extends the dying process to where it really takes years? And if so, are we using that appropriately? Do we realize what we've bought, right? Like, what are we buying with these treatments and with these medications and with this time? Are we using it the way that we want? How are we bringing attention to that? I mean, I think the answer is different for every person, but it's such an interesting question.
Yeah, it's like the extended time. Are we going to use it for more living or are we going to use it for more of that transition piece?
Yeah. But it's hard. I think people often don't realize where we are. My father-in-law went from diagnosis to death in 93 days.
Wow.
It was fast. And I think by the time he realized he was dying, it was too late for him to live. His body was shutting down. And I've thought about that so many times. You'd think having a death doula in the family would help prevent this. It does not, right? When he was diagnosed, if I could go back in time, I wish that that day, we had all bought plane tickets and gone somewhere together. He loved to travel. He worked for an airline. So that was really what we did as a family. Hawaii was his happy place. I wish we had all gone to Hawaii then. And of course, you're kind of stuck in this medical machine, right? So as soon as they give you your terrible diagnosis, they give you their plan for hope. And so they had this plan. It needed to start immediately. He needed brain radiation and he needed to start this immunotherapy and he needed to see the special oncologist. So on his mind, he needed to get healthy and then we'd go to Hawaii. But of course, we never made it to Hawaii.
Yeah.
And this is the conversation that I wish that if we are going to buy more time, can we know at the beginning, right? Like this is the time we're buying. It starts right now.
Mm-hmm.
instead of we're going to do all these treatments and then we're going to start our time when you're feeling better. Because even if we buy the time, I don't find that people tend to ever feel better again. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And two, we're talking about treatments, if we're talking about cancer or heavy dose medication, whatever it is, it's the quality versus quantity of life conversation too. And I think that people, when you have a diagnosis like that, it becomes somehow you lose the quality in favor of the quantity. And
Yeah.
it's like, if I could get a few more months, if I could get whatever, but how do you feel in those months of extension?
Yeah.
And I think that's a hard thing, because if you're sitting in that medical office and the provider says to you, we can extend your life by 3, 6, 12 months, people think that the quality of life that they're going to have is the quality that they have in the office. And that's what you're saying. Like that's usually as good as it gets,
Yeah.
especially if that happens.
Absolutely. I think it's really helpful if families can have one clear value. I learned this I had a pediatric client a few years ago. Her name was Adeline, and she died just before her 5th birthday.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it was hard. But it was hard, and it was so beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
because I think the best of us comes out when there's a child in need, right? The best of everyone came out. And what Adeline's parents decided early on was that their number one value is that the family could be together. They didn't want to have one parent and her in one city pursuing some treatment and the rest of the children and another parent at home. The number one value to make decisions was, can we be together? And it was so helpful for them because how do you make these decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get a call, like maybe there's a new experimental drug that she could go into a trial for. I mean, all of these things, like, of course, your heart, your intuition wants to do anything. And
Mm-hmm.
also, you can have a lot of options, and how do you decide what's best? And I think if the family can determine that one core value that helps them say, this is a yes for us and this is a no for us,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's priceless.
So how did you get into this? Because, I mean, this isn't like there's no high school career fair that's like, you know what, let's take a test. And I think death doula is really in the top 3 for you, right? Like,
I wish I
how
could
did
go
that?
talk at the high school and add this as an
Yeah.
option. I mean, actually, my background educationally, I have a degree in philosophy and a degree in marketing. And so really, I am doing both of those things. I talk about the philosophy of death and the way that we approach it, and I market that to make it palatable to people so that it can serve them. But I got into it so I'm from New Orleans. And of course, every New Orleanian grows up saturated in death and grief culture. It is
Mm-hmm.
very much an and both city, right? We grieve publicly, and joy is right around the corner always. And when I was 22, I was at LSU, and Katrina hit and
Yeah.
wiped out every single member of my family's home. So they were all homeless overnight. And one of my family members, so they all evacuated to my college apartment. I had a full house. I had my little my little college apartment, and I had 14 family members, from my great grandmother, who was 94, all the way down to my my goddaughter, who was 6 weeks old, my siblings, all their pets. We had, I think, 3 dogs and 2 cats. And we were all there for 6 weeks, because
Oh
after
my
a
God.
storm, you can't leave if your home's underwater. And eventually everyone did, find temporary housing and rebuild and get relocated. Everyone except my great aunt Sis. And she was in her early 70s. She had some cognitive impairments and some really severe mental health challenges. And she had been living in archdiocesan housing that was condemned after the storm. And so she had nowhere to go. And because everybody else had their hands full, I stepped in, eldest daughter, right?
Yes.
I stepped in, and we became roommates, and it was pretty clunky. And after about 6 months, she moved into an assisted living facility. But that experience led me to become her healthcare power of attorney. And I was the closest person to her. So over the next 10 or so years, I had to learn how to help her make decisions because of her mental health challenges. She wasn't deemed sufficient to make her own decisions. And so someone had to do that by proxy. And so I had to learn a lot about the end of life system, especially as she approached death. She did not want to take medications. She did not want to have thickened liquids and pureed solids because she was a threat for aspiration, but they did not want to honor her wishes. And so I had to really research what are her rights and how does the system work and how do we advocate for hospice and how can she be able to make these decisions for herself. So when she died, this was, I have to just like give a little disclaimer. This was not a Golden Girls relationship. We were not like best friends that got along super great. She was not happy that she had to have a healthcare power of attorney and it was not her. She did not like that. Also, she wanted to stay my roommate forever. She did not want to move into the assisted living facility.
I love that.
And so she was never exactly grateful of the role that I played. And she never made it easy, which I kind of appreciate. But when she died, I wanted to do something that was meaningful and had integrity to honor her. And so I decided to volunteer at my local hospice for a year because hospice had been such a gift to her. And I just wanted to pay it forward. And in that year of volunteerism, I started to see all the gaps in the care that people have at end of life. Really, that there's the system that operates like a giant machine. And it kind of steamrolls families who have no idea what their options are or what to expect or even what they should be doing. And so I became a death doula so that I could stand beside families in those gaps and educate them and normalize the experience so that they didn't have to feel quite as overwhelmed and at a loss as I felt when I was trying to help make decisions for Aunt Sis.
Aunt Sis, I love that.
Aunt Sis.
The more pushback, the better was always my like professional working with people motto is like, the ones that you go into their room and they are just full of fire. They were my favorite because those people, yeah, they're not going to get lost in the shuffle.
And that teaches us something so essential. I think it's easy to get lost in the shuffle, especially at end of life and especially within this medical model that we live in.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a steamroller for sure in so many different directions. And unfortunately, the biggest, yes, is patients in situations where they might not have advocates or people that are standing there beside them to do that, but also the caregivers who are such an important part of how healthcare functions in this country, but they are completely disadvantaged when it comes to the infrastructure that they need in order to do that.
Yeah, I get it. It's really hard to witness. It's one of the things that I find difficult is that I appreciate the fact that we have the system. When I am approaching my own end of life, I am hopeful that I'll be able to utilize the hospice system. And also, there are a lot of things wrong with it. This is not the system that was designed, that we intended to build. It has become very profit-based and medicalized, and that is a real disservice to the patients and to the healthcare providers within it. So it's an and both, right? Like we're so grateful, at least we have something, but
yeah,
it could be better.
How long have you been doing this work for?
Yeah, so I have been a hospice volunteer for 7 years, although I just quit. I was just shy of my 400 hours, and I stepped away from that. I have been a death doula. I did my first training in 2020, so 6 years, January of 2020. And I've had a private practice since 2021, so 5 years in private practice.
So you navigated, so getting into this via Katrina, which I remember, I live in New England, so I was nowhere near it, but I remember there was a ton of students that just migrated out of the city. So people were trying to finish their degrees and, they were, all I have is the backpack I threw in my car when I left. And, I remember thinking like, holy cow, I cannot imagine. So you have that. And then you also had the pandemic.
Yeah. Almost like little earmarks. The pandemic was very pivotal for me, I guess for everyone. But for me, I had done my death doula training not even a month before shutdowns began. And I was a hospice volunteer, so I had a lot of older friends who were in living facilities. I had one friend at the time. I had been his volunteer for a while, and the facility shut down. And so we would talk on the phone every Wednesday and Sunday night. I would just call and we'd check in. And it was really upsetting for him. He felt shut in. He couldn't leave. No one could come visit him. It was scary. I remember one time he told me that he was just watching body bags leave when COVID hit his facility, and they couldn't leave their rooms to find out, like, was this my friend? Who was it? What happened? It was so scary. And so for me at the time, I think I had wanted to be a death doula, but I hadn't planned on making it a private practice. I was just going to do it as a hospice volunteer. And with that, I had the realization that as a hospice volunteer, I wouldn't be able to go visit anyone because volunteers were the last tier to return to service. But if I was a private practitioner, then I could get my COVID vaccine and then I could go be on an approved visitors list as a adjacent healthcare provider. And so that's partly why I started the private practice, was to have access to the people who had no one at the time. They lost so many of the services they were dependent on for their own safety, but they were lonely and also processing a lot of death and staring their own death right in the face. And what time would you need a death doula more than a pandemic? Yeah.
Well, and all of that, I mean, it's not even that, it's not like the flu. Like the flu goes through an assisted living facility or anything like that. And, that's like 1 and 2. This was a tidal wave of people. It's just, yeah, I mean, that's the processing too, right? Like it could be me, but also like, I can't, if I went to the cafeteria right now, who would I sit with? If I went to go sit at the table to like play games with somebody, who would even be left? And that not knowing space, that is, I can't imagine.
I think really scary, especially when you're elderly. You're already thinking about a lot of these things. And to not have community when we do it. And of course, I feel like we've been talking more and more since COVID about how important it is to have companionship, about loneliness being an epidemic in our senior population. So I think that was a real disservice. I don't know how we could have avoided it as a society, but I think for me, it was a real call to action, right? Like it's not a coincidence that I learned these skills right before this happened.
And you're able to like really jump right in and get started making an impact for people. Hey, it's Ashley. When I started my business, my first business, it felt like I had 2 options: figure it out on my own or pay a high ticket price for a coach, and there was nothing in between. I was a beginner trying to make smart decisions without burning myself out or my savings, so I built what I wish had existed. This course is 6 clear, practical modules that take you from first decisions to launch and beyond. No fluff, just guidance, structure, and support. And no how bad do you want it, or we all have the same 24 hours in the day guilt trips. I created it to help women build lives and businesses on their own terms, not just to sell a course. Listeners can take 20% off with the code NURTURED20. For more information, go to andbothpodcast.com. So since you started, have you seen trends or changes? Or, I mean, I feel like I think it's one of those things where for me, for this, I mean, I've always clinically been associated with that because I have been on the medical side of that conversation, and then in my own family, stuff like that. But I feel like maybe it is because I have been speaking to so many people recently about this that it's kind of everywhere. But I also feel like the door got cracked open with COVID because we couldn't hide from. There was no way medically in some situations to prevent people from dying of COVID. And that kind of like circles back to what we were talking about before, where there's no magic pill, there's no magic treatment. I mean, people are trying everything and there was so much, there's just nothing else that we can do. And we have to make sure that we make these people as comfortable as possible, where we swung all the way back. I mean, it's once in a century situation which also ties in with how we were talking about before with people that back in that day where it was a part of there's nothing more we can do. Have you noticed the conversation since you've started have changed, have opened, have broadened, or not?
No, I think so. I think that, so one of my favorite colleagues is a hospice nurse named Barbara Carnes. She wrote the little blue book that every single hospice patient in the US just about receives when they enroll in hospice support. Are you going to pull out the little blue book?
No. I was like, do I have the little blue book? Maybe.
I have one. Do you want to see it? I have one right here.
Yeah.
She has other colors too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
She actually has them for grief. I'm trying to read backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, life-threatening illness, and then vigil, the 11th hour.
Yeah.
But what she says all the time, I think she even has T-shirts that say this, is death doesn't happen like it does in the movies. And I think that's what COVID did. To your point, it made what used to be something tucked behind a hospital door, which I think was our ideal. It brought it back into the forefront of conversation. And I think we started to see death in some ways. I think it helped us realize the disparity between the way our culture was depicting death and the way that we are seeing it live out. And so I do think that there's been a trend. I've noticed in TV in particular, there's been some excellent, I say excellent from my perspective, that means accurate, right?
Yes.
Some accurate depictions of the dying process. I'm thinking about the Hulu show Dying for Sex.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful depiction of the dying process. Very, very honest and real. And that's the kind of stuff that I think we really need, because if all we have is horror movies and then these sensational cinematic last breaths where they're still talking and looking beautiful, right? And then they're dead, right? We don't know what it looks like. And we feel even more scared about what it's going to look like because our fear becomes the boogeyman. So I do think that there's been culturally a trend to understand and prepare for it a little more. I've also seen this movement of death doulas really grow. When I stepped into this work, it was still really a fledgling profession. The work of death doulas is ancient. It goes, in fact, the word doula means servant in ancient Greek. So the idea of bringing a heart of service to those who are dying. I mean, even in our earliest villages here in the US, we had midwives who helped shepherd life in and shepherd life out in the home with the family. So this work is ancient, but as a profession, it's just fledgling again. And that was really starting around the time that I joined this movement, and I've been able to see how enormous it's becoming. It really is growing. And I think that there's something about that that is indicative of where we are in this cultural moment. I think people, whether or not they want to serve as professional death doulas, because it's a pretty tall order. I think people are curious about how they can use these tools and these skills and this heart of service in their own families, in their own communities, in their own church groups or, neighborhoods. And I think that is a different approach than where we were even 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I always think about when people talk about like a death, like a scene of somebody passing in a movie, I always think about like Forrest Gump.
Remind me of the scene. I just saw it recently.
Yeah. So Forrest's mom is laying in bed and she's like in this like clean white nightgown in a room that's like whitewashed walls and the sun is coming in and she's laying there talking to him and he's talking to her and then her eyes close and all this. And that's not what it is.
No. And that actually, the probably most common experience I have as a doula. So I'm not always present for the last breath, but a lot of times I am. And the most common experience is that the family asks me, is this it? Is this it? Because to your point, it's not what we are expecting it to be. And I think if there's one thing that I feel like I tell people at end of life, it's that like 90% of people will die in a hospital bed. Even if you're at home on hospice, you're probably not going to die in your own bed. And that I'd like to tell people that because it starts to close that gap. I think there's, in everyone's mind, it's hard to picture what the journey's going to be like from how I am right now to when I'm dead. But that's going to be a releasing of everything, right? Of everything is going to have to be released. Your ability to move, your ability to toilet independently, your ability to communicate, your ability to, every single thing is going to have to leave your body before the spirit can leave. And that usually means that you receive a good deal of care in your bed. And that's for people, I think it always feels shocking. And I can't even, I wish I could do a poll for this because I see the look. It's like, not me. When I say that, I feel like most often, almost everyone's like, well, that's not going to be me. And yet, as much as we can talk about the beautiful, the holy spiritual work of a person preparing to die, there's also a very animalistic physical process that the body has to go through, right? And so we need a hospital bed to lift you up so we can change you, to lift your head up, to reposition you, to prevent bed sores, to all of the things, right? It becomes a tool that we become pretty dependent on, especially in those last days of care. But that's part of closing that gap between what you're talking about, those Forrest Gump moments and all the others that we see that are so similar. And I think sometimes people miss the window to say those things like Forrest's mother said to him, right? Because we think that we will have that kind of ability all the way up until the last breath. But by and large, 99% of the time, the person is in a coma-like state when they are dying naturally of a disease process. And so it's usually days after they stop talking that they die, or at least hours.
And I think, too, that the other part that's so important about this conversation is like that there's not a right way. And I think that, if the focus is on trying to create that Forrest Gump moment, it's another way to avoid what's coming, right? It's like that control piece that you were talking about is like, well, we need them to have this is what needs to happen. And you're going to come, like people choreograph the things. It's the what is it, Olaf and Frozen, right? I'm trying to control the things I can control. We've got the montage of people that have to move through and what this looks like and all that. But exactly that, people do not, there's no like gentle breeze and a linen curtain.
Or it can be if that's what's most important to you, but we're only going to really be able to get what's most important to you. So let's be real clear about what that is.
Yeah.
Because if having that linen curtain and gentle breeze is most important, then that's where all of our focus can be, but we might not be able to create this perfect compilation, like you said, the montage. And I think that leads us back to kind of where we started from, which is that I think it's hard for people to imagine that who they are in life is who they will be when they're dying. And I think it's hard for us as the caregivers to accept that the person that we've loved this whole time is going to be the person who dies too. So if Dad wasn't a man of words and didn't speak his feelings easily, he's probably not going to give you that deathbed blessing that you're hoping for.
Yeah.
Right? Or sometimes I think we do try to over control and over orchestrate. I had a client a few years ago. She and her husband she was young. She was in her 40s, and she and her husband were funny. They loved to fight. That was how they connected, was through fighting. And they were loud. And so she has written out this plan. As the doula, part of my job is to help understand what you want the space to be like when you're dying, what will bring you comfort, what will help ease that tension of the spirit separating from the body. And so we're writing these things down. But the thing she's telling me, I'm having such a hard time picturing. The one that really sticks out is that she wanted her husband to get in bed behind her so that he was leaning up against the headboard and cradle her body as she was taking her last breath. And I'm starting to write it down and I'm thinking like, well, first of all, we don't always know that this is going to be the last breath. It's not like there's a little, like a scroll that goes by like, this is it, like we're not always 100% sure. And then like, he has to be willing to do this for this to be her plan. And so I call him into the room and I'm like, do you think that you could help us practice this? And he's like, what? I don't want to do this. What do I have to do? And I'm like, okay, well, she wants you to get in the bed and get behind her and lean against the headboard and then cradle her body and like look down at her and like stroke her hair. And he just looks at me and he's like, you're fucking crazy. And he walks out. And so then to the client, I'm like, look, I get it. This would be the fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And there might be something that we need to grieve here about what will never be. But we're not getting him to do this. Like, if I can't get him to do it now, it's going to be really hard to convince him to do this when he's exhausted, when he's overwhelmed, when he's been caring for your body for days on very little sleep, when you don't feel present in your body anymore. Like, we have to accept that who we are now and the relationships that we have now are going to be what's there at the end too.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's hard. I get it too. I wrote my advanced care plans and I did a little of this. I was like, I want to have a cup of tea from my herb garden. And I'm like, I haven't grown herbs in like 5 years. Like, I want to be under a blanket my grandma knit. My grandma hasn't knit me a blanket. Like, it's just, you have this fantasy of what you would want.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's the way that we can really think about death, is like, if it has to happen, then it could be this fantasy. But the truth is, it's very ordinary.
Yeah. How do you write the last act of your own play?
Yeah.
So after someone passes and the family is working with a death doula, what is the process for you in unwinding from that? Because you become very enmeshed in the dynamics and in all of that. So what does that look like, the transition piece out? Because I think people talk about bringing somebody in, but it's not like, the person passes and you're like, could you sign here? And then like, I'm out.
So that's what it is like with hospice. And people feel devastated by that. They feel betrayed. And I think the best hospices do offer more bereavement support. But by and large, I told you about Adeline earlier. I'll never forget that. I think it was the morning after she died, her mother got a call from the pharmacy saying that all of her prescriptions had been canceled. And it just felt brutal, right? Like, the awareness of it was still landing and the system kept right on trucking.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's important that a death doula can continue to walk alongside a family. And it's different for every family. Some of my clients, like Roxanne, so sometimes I'm hired by the dying person. And so she hired me about 8 months before she died. So it was a longer term relationship. I still talk to her husband, not regular, but often enough. I saw him on Sunday. Sometimes I'm only brought in for the last week. I had a client last month where I was asked to go to the hospital on one Friday. She died at home the following Friday, and then we attended her funeral the following Friday. So my entire work with the family happened in a 2 to 3 week span. So then that's going to have a little bit less of a grief support connection. But at the moment of death, I really think that those first few hours, that's where doula work can really shine, especially if you were there to support the family. When the dying person hires you as the doula, it becomes a little bit trickier because usually it means that they don't trust the family or there isn't family to do exactly what they want. So you become their advocate, you become their mouth. And that's a tricky place to stand. When the caregivers hire you, that is a little bit easier in a lot of ways because they know that they're going to be the ones providing care, but they want to be well supported and they want to walk through this as best they can. So at the moment of death, I think having a death doula on call is such a precious gift because we slow the sense of urgency. It can be scary to sit with a body that doesn't have a spirit in it, especially if it's not something that you've done. And of course, we used to do this, right? Like wakes used to be done in the family parlor. The funeral parlor is named after that tradition of the parlor was where the body was laid out and the town was invited to come visit. We've lost that sense of comfort around the dead, but I think that intuitively, a lot of us still yearn for a little spaciousness to let our minds catch up with the reality of the death.
Mm-hmm.
And so in those immediate moments following a death, having a death doula present can help you sit and be still. I think the instinct is as soon as the person dies, we should call hospice or we should
Yeah.
call the funeral home. But really allowing yourself to have a little time with that body, to have, especially if you've been caring for them, like physically providing care, which 90% of care at end of life is provided by family members. So if you've been caring for this body every step of the way, it can be really natural and supportive to also provide care of the body after the person has died. And so I usually recommend that families just pause, take as long as they need. The last family that I was with for a death last month, I think they spent maybe about an hour just playing music and touching her. And it was almost like you could see acceptance landing.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is that. I mean, I've had it. I have sat right at the bedside and I often match my breath to theirs just to see where they are in the process. And I have had that moment of disbelief where my brain forgets for a second and I look and I'm waiting for them to take the next breath. And so I think if you give your mind a little spaciousness, it can catch up better. And then I usually recommend to families, whatever your intuition is saying, the answer is yes, you can do that. This is your person. And so if for a lot of times daughters want to bathe their parents' body themselves, and I usually really encourage them to do that, either, something very simple like washing up the hands or the face before hospice comes to pronounce, or asking the hospice staff if you can assist. And having a death doula there, I don't provide any kind of care like that. I provide the yeses to let them feel like they can. And I basically just stand there and promise I'll tell them if they do something wrong, but they're not going to do anything wrong.
Right.
they just feel, I think they're so conscientious, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
families want to make sure they get this right. And I've seen some really powerful and beautiful rituals develop, like very ceremonial aspects that didn't have planning. It was just natural. Going back to Adeline, my pediatric client, to have her mother wash and braid her hair one last time was a powerful moment. And I think these small little rituals of returning care of the dead to the families, I think it can really help us to start working with our grief in real time and also start relieving that fear of death that is so natural to come with being present for death.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That is like, I have two daughters and oh my God, that's, I can't imagine.
Well, and both. They couldn't imagine. That's how they found their way to me. And they also knew that they needed to imagine something better than the standard.
Yeah.
Because the idea of her body leaving the home and going to a funeral home to be refrigerated was not going to work. They were not going to have that. And so they called me to figure out, how do we prevent this from happening? And the truth is, it takes I'm tenacious and I'm audacious. But that's all it really takes, right?
Yeah.
So we found a funeral director who would allow them to keep her at home after death until burial. It wasn't long. I think it was maybe 48 hours at most. But it ended up being what we call a home funeral. Although it was under the direction of a funeral director, he was very present and to answer
Mm-hmm.
any questions, so they didn't feel any kind of responsibility. But she was laid in her little toddler bed, and her community came into the playroom and were able to have a chance to say goodbye to her, not embalmed, not in a funeral parlor, not in a casket, right? And it was such a gentle and powerful way to reimagine how we can bring sacredness to the unbearable. And I was fortunate enough to be able to give part of her eulogy. And what I heard after from the members, they're part of a really big church. And what I heard after was just like, it had been so powerful for the community to witness death that didn't feel so sterile and
Yeah.
institutional. And it felt so
Mechanized.
necessary, yes, for this precious little life, right? To be held and preciousness by her parents until she was buried. And it was, when I first got the call for her family, I wasn't sure if I could do it. And I'm a mom, right? It's your worst fear. So in a way, you're confronting your worst fear. And also, I will be forever changed by that experience, and not by the hard parts of it, by how beautiful it was.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's amazing to have that opportunity in that whole situation. I mean, I don't know what the circumstances were, but to have that opportunity to have some control in something that there's no control over.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. And I think that is what we're seeing. I think about Roxanne too. She had this elaborate vigil, the hours of her dying process. It was a long list of things I was supposed to do. And I had to keep them going. So she wanted neroli oil diffused. She had a Northern Lights projection that had to stay on. She wanted to have her favorite kimono hanging where she could see it. She wanted fresh flowers and her favorite crystal by her head. I mean, it was like this, she orchestrated this space. And as I was helping her write this plan, I don't know if I realized the gift that it would be. But when her family was gathered around as she was going through the dying process, they were held in a space of her creation that she planned for them. They were more relaxed than you would ever imagine, because she was everywhere making sure that they felt as relaxed as possible. She had oil diffuse, she had sound bowl healing, she had crystals, she had all these things to welcome them into the space, to make it gentler so that they could show up. Because when her first husband had died, it was so medical, it was traumatic. And she didn't want that for them. She wanted her death to have more ease. And it felt like her. And this is as a death doula, it's it's an and both spot to be in, because I am brought in to educate. I am brought in to tell the family what their options are, to help them feel like they are confident in choosing what's best for them, truly to be a fellow traveler on that path with them and not a tour guide. I have to trust that death is the teacher for them. And that as much as I think I might know, it is totally different for every single person.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had so many experiences where I've thought, my ego comes out and I'm like, okay, in my mind, right? And then they were absolutely right. And that's how it goes. So it's just the kind of work that the diversity and the brilliance of each human could not be louder.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you're weaving all of that in together in these experiences and doing the work of, building a resource space for people, building different levels of operation so that whether you meet people in person or it's virtual or it's access to resources, that it's helping to spread the word about, maybe someone lives in Ohio and they come across you. It's what sort of questions do we need to ask when we're moving into this transition or this part of our experience with a family member or ourselves? How do we advocate for ourselves? How do we adopt some of that audacity and tenaciousness to say, I don't really want to continue. Either I do want to continue to be a part of the medical component of this, I just want to know what's coming, or I don't, or some of this, some of that, whatever it is. I love that there's lots of different ways for people to interact.
I agree. I didn't answer your question fully before about how support continues after the death. But a lot of death doulas specialize in grief support. That's not something I specialize in.
Mm-hmm.
I am very present for very tender, intimate moments. And so we stay in touch.
Mm-hmm.
But I refer out to grief support because I am a recovering codependent eldest daughter. And it will be my responsibility until my last breath if I don't have some pretty clear boundaries with myself about how I can stay in touch with people. But to what you're saying now, I think that the future of death doula work is to educate as many people as possible about how they can use these tools for themselves and for their communities. I think it would be wonderful if every single person had access to a death doula. I also believe that this work needs to be compensated because there's a huge emotional and energetic cost to performing it. And so how do we bridge that gap? How do we make something like this accessible to all? And I think the solution might be providing access to the education. So how do we support caregivers as they use the tools that are appropriate and necessary for them? And how do we help build community groups that can offer this to one another? My new project is talking to church groups and other small community groups that don't have access to death doulas, either geographically or with financial resources. And so how do we offer training so that they can doula one another? Because this is not wisdom that needs to have a gatekeeper, right? This is all of our collective wisdom. And I think we have a karmic debt to share it with the people who want to learn. And that really is the most powerful thing about doing this work, is that almost every family I serve, someone at the end of it says, I think I might want to be a death doula. It's intuitive to us to care for people who are suffering. And it is a very sacred space that you step into. And you don't have to do this professionally as your 9 to 5 in order to be a death doula, right? Like being the person in the family that gets called when someone's dying, being the person that goes to every funeral, being the person that knows to drop off a casserole and mow the grass for a griever. Like these are all ways that we serve one another as death doulas.
I love that. Well, I would love for you to let people know how they can get in touch with you, whether it's in the area or outside of that, or people who say, I just helped a family member and I'm really interested in this. So how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, if you are looking to find me, Farewell Fellowship is the best place. That's farewellfellowship.com. From there, you can see all of the resources on the library, including some podcast episodes, lots of essays, lots of fun reels over on Instagram through the Farewell Library. Really, truly fun. I'm not just saying that. We try to make it fun. And then Farewell Education is the place where I encourage people who want to make a profession of this work to consider doing so in a sacred lineage. It's easy to take a virtual weekend course, and I think that's perfect for caregivers, for people in the medical and healthcare community. But for those of us who are called into this work, I think sacred lineage of mentorship and hands-on teaching and side-by-side practice, that's all through Farewell Education.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you to Adelaide and Roxanne. Yeah, it's I think the more we talk about the things, the more light that gets shone into the nooks and crannies of human existence, the better off we're going to be, because there's no monsters hiding around corners if you know where all the corners are.
Couldn't say it better.
Thank you so much. And I will share out links. So if people are looking for more information or conversation, it'll be there. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Ashley.